Who are the people who simply can't help themselves from scamming over and over? Let's dig right in, starting with number 6, a Lamar Whitehead update. A Brooklyn church sued Bishop Lamar Whitehead for locking the congregation out of their house of worship. This is the latest controversy for the ostentatious Whitehead, whom we previously covered for being indicted on federal charges. Whitehead bought the Glory of God Global Ministries property at a foreclosure auction in February 2022 for $1.94 million. However, a senior pastor at Glory of God fought the tax lien that caused the foreclosure and claimed they never handed over the building to Whitehead. A judge sided with Glory of God in a separate housing court case and allowed the ministry back into their building. According to the congregation, Whitehead took over the property without the appropriate court order. He then illegally changed the locks a few weeks before Christmas, preventing hundreds of church members from attending Sunday services. The church responded by suing Whitehead for $5 million for breach of contract. Additionally, the congregation wanted a judge to bar him from claiming ownership of the building. Whitehead filed for Chapter 11 bankruptcy, arguing that the declaration should mean that the housing court case was put on hold. Whitehead made headlines in 2022 when thieves robbed him in the middle of a sermon. The incident was live streamed for the world to see, and the footage went viral. If you couldn't tell by now, Whitehead likes wearing expensive jewelry and designer suits. He also enjoys driving luxury cars, such as a Rolls-Royce, so he's no stranger to controversy and attracting attention in general. Whitehead was indicted on federal fraud charges and faced allegations of scamming members of his congregation, the Leaders of Tomorrow International Ministries. He also allegedly made up bank records to secure a loan for his $1 million New Jersey mansion. An article in the New Yorker prompted a federal case against him, and Whitehead believed that businessman Brandon Belmonte's statements in the piece were to blame for his legal issues. In response, he filed a $200 million slander lawsuit against Belmonte. It's easier for a camel to pass through the eye of a needle than it is for Bishop Whitehead to stay out of trouble, eh? Number 5. Only scams. California-based Ashley Bemis pretended to have a firefighter husband battling the holy hell wildfire in order to dupe people into sending her cash. Bemis posted on Facebook that her husband, Shane Goodman, was working hard to contain the out-of-control wildfire which destroyed over 23,000 acres of land in August of 2018. She also mentioned having 2 other family members and many friends working on both the holy hell fire and others burning across the state. Posing as a distressed wife, Bemis posted on social media that her husband was texting her about how awful the blaze was. She offered to drive to people's homes or meet them somewhere to pick up any donations they wanted to make to firefighters and first responders on the front line. Bemis asked for things like sports drinks, water, socks, and camping equipment. People that couldn't donate those items offered to give her cash instead. So she made over $11,000 from Good Samaritans who wanted to support her pretend husband. Bemis had a track record of fabricating stories and faked at least 3 pregnancies to deceive people into giving her money. She would wear prosthetics to create the illusion of a growing belly and fool those around her. In 2011, she was a nanny for Emily Strickland's son. Strickland discovered photos of her child dressed as a girl on Bemis' Facebook page, where Bemis claimed Strickland's son was her daughter. Quinn and Starla Bork threw her a baby shower and spent hundreds of dollars they couldn't afford to make it special. Bemis used the party as an opportunity to receive gifts that she could resell. Lori Chrisman, who helped organize the shower, received a text from Bemis that she was in the hospital, but the child was stillborn. When Lori contacted the hospital, she found out that Bemis wasn't a patient there, and the hospital hadn't had a stillborn in several years. After Bemis shared more pictures of herself and her supposed husband online, a local fire captain took notice. The captain reported her to authorities, who discovered that Shane Goodman never existed. Bemis pleaded guilty to multiple charges, including grand theft, second-degree burglary, and fraud. A judge sentenced her to 6 months in jail. Shane Goodman never existed, but he'll always exist in our hearts. Like Bing Bong. Sorry for the unexpected punch in the feels, all of you born circa 2005. Number 4. The greatest romance scammer on earth. Timothy Russell deceived women he met online into buying him luxury vehicles. One of his victims, who was also his fiancée, confronted him about the situation after learning the truth. Russell fled, and she reported him to law enforcement. Russell's fiancée was one of several women who thought he was Deputy U.S. Marshal Austin Gardner. She lived with him for 9 months before the incident when she found credit cards he took out in her name and Russell's federal IDs in a different name to Austin Gardner. During their relationship, Russell convinced her to buy a Cadillac Escalade, a Ford Mustang Shelby GT, and a Can-Am Spyder 3-wheeled motorbike. He may have also purchased other vehicles in her name without her knowing. Shortly after she bought each vehicle, Russell would tell her they were stolen, although in reality, he either disposed of them or sold them. One night, he came home with a Lamborghini, and he told his fiancée that his wealthy aunt and uncle had bought it for him as a wedding gift. Russell also took his future bride to Florida, where he claimed he had a training session. Instead, he went out to meet his Fort Myers girlfriend. Another of his victims, Kylie Wood, realized Russell had conned her when she discovered police warrants issued for Craigslist scams he ran 3 years before she met him. Russell allegedly scammed people out of thousands of dollars when he pretended to buy their used cars over Craigslist. He told Wood his name was Remington Woods, and a month into their relationship, he offered to help her buy a new truck. She sold her current vehicle for $14,000 and gave him $20,000 for the new vehicle. When Wood confronted Russell about the arrest warrants, he ran away with the money. Russell then moved on to a victim in Pennsylvania who, like the others, he met on an online dating site. Russell scammed her out of $7,000, then targeted a Texas woman who lost $9,500 to Russell's fake car sales scam. Russell fooled many of his victims into believing he was a federal officer by purchasing a commemorative badge on eBay. He also bought fake identity cards and tactical gear that appeared to have been police issued. After the confrontation with his fiancée that led to him running away, she canceled their credit card, which was his only payment method. Russell broke down on the side of the road and flashed his fake U.S. Marshal badge to persuade his tow truck driver to cover his motel room for a night. Russell also reached out to his Florida girlfriend for money, but police intercepted her before she could send him her credit card information. Authorities arrested and charged him with 4 counts of identity theft and 1 count of impersonating a police officer. Having that many angry exes all at once? He's definitely a brave man. Number 3. The dental embezzle. Robin Bernazzani embezzled an estimated $500,000 from her former employer over a 6-year period. Bernazzani was a longtime employee of Dental Associates of the Southwest, a dental office where she had a job that had access to the company's financial accounts. She wrote checks to herself or one of her business accounts and would either forge a dentist's signature or use a signature stamp. Then, Bernazzani entered the amount she took into QuickBooks and claimed it as an expense to a supply company or dental lab. Bernazzani would also use a dentist's credit card for personal bills or online shopping. Again, she would enter the money she took as bulk payment charges to a dental supply company in QuickBooks. Employees became suspicious of Bernazzani when the dental office realized something suspicious was happening with its finances. Bernazzani eventually confessed to her employer that she had been embezzling from the office for up to 6 years. She followed up the verbal confession with a written one, explaining why she did it and taking responsibility for her actions. Bernazzani submitted a second confession letter with even more detail on how she stole the money and added an estimate of how much she took. In response, Dental Associates of the Southwest hired a third-party accounting firm to complete an audit and confirm the amount stolen. It wasn't the first time Bernazzani faced criminal theft charges. In 2008, she stole $10,000 from First National Bank of Durango and received a deferred sentence, which is a conviction without jail time. She completed the terms of her probation, erasing the conviction from her record. Although her defense attorney argued that Bernazzani used the money from the dental office to support her family, confessed to her actions, and promised not to commit a similar crime again, the judge wasn't as lenient this time. Bernazzani pleaded guilty to embezzling over $500,000 from her former employer and received a 4-year prison sentence. Wow, that punishment sure wasn't toothless. Number 2, $1 million smile. Robin Bernazzani wasn't the only dental office embezzler. Michigan-based Stephanie K. Chislinski stole almost $1 million from her former employer, Dr. Michael T. Smith, who employed her for 10 years. Her husband, Kenneth Chislinski, was her accomplice in the scheme. The FBI conducted an investigation into the couple's actions, which involved local law enforcement towards the end. Unaware that they had been found out, the couple was arrested. Kenneth had been a corrections officer since 1986 and never received disciplinary action. The sheriff, his boss at the time, arrested him at the end of his shift after talking to the FBI and the local police departments. He was 1 month away from retiring. Stephanie stole the funds and placed them in a bank account under Kenneth's name. During the criminal investigation, investigators found photographs of him making at least 2 deposits. Stephanie faced several counts of embezzlement and pleaded guilty to 1 count of embezzling between $50,000 and $100,000 a few months before her October 2012 trial. The couple took the money to buy nicer things, including purchasing brand new cars for their daughters, but their spending quickly became out of control. While they indulged in lavish expenses off the back of a man who spent years building his practice, Dr. Smith lost almost $1 million from a trusted employee. Stephanie's daughters both got their new cars, while Dr. Smith's got whatever they could afford. The couple pleaded guilty to 6 felonies related to the embezzlement. Stephanie received a mandatory 3 years in prison, which would typically be less, so she could get out to work on paying Dr. Smith back. However, because of the amount of money involved, the judge doesn't see that ever happening, even with early release. It's sad, but you also have to wonder what Dr. Smith was thinking the whole time he was scraping by. Like, man, being a dentist sucks. I should have been a vet. Number 1. Jobs for everyone. Conman Mohammed Maji tricked vulnerable victims out of thousands of dollars to fund his gambling habit. Maji ran several schemes to deceive people into handing over their money. One of them involved posting fake job listings. When job seekers responded to the ads, he insisted they take out phone contracts at the British cell phone store Carphone Warehouse. Maji convinced 4 people to take out the contracts, claiming store employees were involved with the interview process and the contracts would be canceled afterward. Ismail Khan, who has autism and other learning disabilities, lost $8,690 in the scam. Maji claimed he didn't know that Khan had learning disabilities, but it's not like that would have stopped him. The other 3 victims lost $5,539. In a previous scam, he advertised a room in his apartment on the home sharing website spareroom.com, offering bedrooms for around $1,300 per month. He showed potential tenants around the home and asked for an upfront deposit to secure the room. Once he had the cash, he cut off communication with the scam tenants and reposted the house on the website. One of his victims, Abdul Khalid, handed over $6,703 in deposits and rent advances to secure the room for him, his wife, and their 3-month-old daughter. They were desperate for a place to live, but when Khalid tried to confirm a move-in date, Maji ghosted him. After viewing the room, Zayed Farabi gave Maji $370 to secure it. When Maji demanded a cosigner, Farabi's brothers sold thousands of pounds of jewelry to cover the rental costs. Like Khalid, Farabi couldn't get in touch with Maji to discuss moving in. He took $2,731 from another couple who discovered that Maji had locked the doors when they arrived at the property. Maji's victims filed a police report, which led to his arrest. Initially, he denied 4 counts of fraud, but eventually pleaded guilty. Maji received a 14-month prison sentence suspended for 2 years. The judge also ordered him to complete 30 thinking skills sessions and pay his victims monthly installments of $310. We know a few people who need those. How big can we make these sessions? Maji returned to court after making 2 late payments and failing to pay a third. His excuse was that the date of his government benefit payments had changed. The judge accepted his reasons, but insisted he catch up and continue making payments. It's time to talk about some scams that are really easy to fall for. Let's get right to it with number 5, $25,000 transfer. Aussie teen Aurora Casilli was defrauded of her life savings after falling for a phone scam. She'd been saving the money for years and had planned to use it to buy her own house. Aurora had been working since she was 14 and sometimes even held multiple jobs. She did all of that for one reason: to fatten her savings account and take her closer to her dream of purchasing her own home. But now, all of that work might have gone down the drain as she now has nothing to her after falling victim to fraud. One day, Aurora was making breakfast when she got a text from her bank. The text came from the same number her bank usually sent her texts with and belonged to the same text thread on her phone. The text said that the bank was worried that there was someone with a different name trying to get access to her funds. The message directed her to call a number so she could get everything sorted out. It was even in the same form as her bank's previous messages. So, Aurora called the number on the text and was greeted with the same prompts that calling her bank typically came with. She was even put on hold for about an hour. Today, she knows that was probably part of a plan to give more legitimacy to the operation. Because what sort of con man puts a potential victim on hold for an hour? When Aurora finally connected with someone on the other side, she was greeted by a professional and polite man with a British accent. She'd always believed that scammers spoke with foreign accents and broken English, so this gave the call even more legitimacy. Unfortunately, the call wasn't coming from the bank. The man told Aurora that her account was under attack and that for her safety, she should transfer all her money to a new account the man set up in her name, as per protocol. The account was supposedly at the same bank as her current account, so the security steps made sense. So Aurora transferred the money to the new account and sealed the fate of her savings. After hanging up, she looked up the details of the new account and discovered that it was at another bank and under another name. So she called the man back and tried to ask him why he'd given her an account at a different bank. But he hung up. So she called again and he hung up again. That's when realization hit her like a ton of undercooked pancakes. No amount of butter and syrup was gonna save her. Aurora reported the scam to her bank and they conducted their investigations. In the report they gave her, the bank determined that since she had authorized the transfer herself, the bank wasn't at fault. They also told her that there was nothing they could do to help her retrieve those funds. The money had been removed from the account it was sent to, and there was no way to get it back. However, they did offer her $2,000, but she turned the money down. The scammer was never held accountable. Number 4. Secondhand tickets. Ray McDonald and his friends were scammed out of £19,000 after purchasing 19 fake Champions League finals tickets for £1,000 each. Ray and his friends had already bought a total of 40 legitimate tickets from the sellers, so there was never any reason to be suspicious. However, the boys realized that they had been scammed when the page selling the tickets was deleted on Twitter. Ray was about to go to sleep when he heard the news and tried to contact the person who had sold him the tickets, but the phone number was no longer in service. Ray and his friends weren't the only ones to get scammed by scalpers claiming to have original tickets for football games. This particular scalper had added Ray and his friends to a WhatsApp group of 50 members, all of whom got scammed of roughly the same amount. When Ray shared the news that he had been conned, he got thousands of messages from friends and family who claimed to have fallen victim to the same scam. Many of them had bought tickets for more than £1,000, and all the money was gone, never to be recovered. Ray contacted his bank and tried to recover the money paid, but it was a lost cause. The bank said because he had authorized the transaction himself, there was nothing they could do about it. Liverpool FC has called on social media companies to block social media accounts involved in selling or offering to sell Champions League match tickets. The scammers who got Ray and his friends simply took advantage of a second-hand ticket market that's been easy to scam for years. If they wanted to watch a bunch of grown men faking injuries for an hour and a half, they could have just watched a professional wrestling match. Number 3. The Lebanese Loop. Ray Conley was a former scriptwriter who had spent some time writing elaborate cons for 90s shows such as Perfect Scoundrels, so he isn't the sort of person you think would be taken in by a scam. But that's exactly what happened to him. One day, Ray and his wife were out and about and searching for somewhere to park their car. What they found was a paid parking lot. Ray didn't have cash on him to pay for parking, and the machine at the spot they wanted to park was defective. What a predicament. As the couple stood by the defective ATM, a man approached them asking if they needed any help. They explained the situation, and the guy said that the machines in the area were often defective. However, he had a solution. He would take them to another machine where Ray's wife could use her bank card to pay for parking. Ray believed him because he thought the guy was a parking machine engineer or maintenance guy or something. Some kind of official wandering ATM parking lot guy. They're everywhere. When they arrived at the other machine, Ray's wife slotted her debit card into it and entered her PIN. But the machine ate the card like he was Mr. Toilet Man. Our apologies to those few people born in the 80s authorities who were scarred by this obscure reference. Anyways, the seemingly helpful man now made a call to someone who Ray believed was a colleague of the man's that worked on the parking machines in the area. The colleague told Ray and his wife to go back and wait by their car. He said that someone would soon be there to help her retrieve her card. Ray didn't realize it at the time, but he and his wife had just fallen for a scam that's commonly called the Lebanese Loop. In the meantime, the man who helped them left for other business. After 20 minutes, Ray and his wife became suspicious and left the area. That's when Ray logged into his wife's account and found a charge of over 350 pounds. 215 pounds had been withdrawn from an ATM 15 minutes earlier, and a further 77 pounds had been spent on groceries. The couple had fallen for a somewhat complex scam. The scam starts with a mark, which was the victim about to be defrauded. The scammers then find a way to get their mark to use a debit card on a parking machine that has been rigged beforehand. In Ray's case, the premise used was that the parking lot machine was defective and the rigged one functioned properly. The fraudsters rigged the parking machines by inserting devices that stop cards from getting ejected. So when the mark uses their debit card on the machine, they are unable to retrieve it. Once this is done, the scammer retrieves the debit card from the machine secretly. In this fraud, the scammer makes sure he sees the PIN number being entered in so that when he retrieves the card, he can use it on other machines. In Ray's case, the con man saw Ray's wife entering the PIN. His colleague on the phone, who asked them to wait beside their car, only did that so that the fraudster could retrieve the card from the machine without anyone noticing. Ray reported the incident to the bank, and the police found out that the fraud was all too common in the area. They tried to review the CCTV footage and found out that the man in question was wearing a wide hat and a nose mask, so it was impossible to identify him. In the end, the loss wasn't permanent as the bank reimbursed Ray's wife. At least the scammers bought groceries, so that makes it okay, right? Maybe the guy was a modern-day Aladdin or something. Number 2. Hard to be insensitive. Amanda Riley faked cancer for about 7 years to rake in thousands of dollars in donations. Her scam was simple but surprisingly effective. Amanda claimed that she suffered from Hodgkin's lymphoma, a type of cancer, and asked for donations from friends and family to treat it. Her family members, friends, and even church members donated cash to the cause. But instead of using the cash for her phantom cancer treatment, she spent it all on personal expenses. Amanda didn't just ask people to donate to her funds indirectly. She held pretty successful fundraising drives to get the money. She organized several in-person fundraisers, including some at the church, which is pretty wild if you think about it. All in all, Amanda got about 400 donations that totaled more than $106,000. She got money from organizations on Facebook, a CrossFit fundraiser, raffles, various sales, and even eBay auctions. Amanda posted photos of medications, photos of her in the hospital receiving treatment, and even shaved her hair to show the effects of the phantom chemotherapy sessions she was having. That's dedication to the art if we've ever seen one. Amanda didn't just post pictures and organize fundraisers. She also built a pretty impressive online profile for her fake illness. She launched a blog titled Lymphoma Can Suck It and made sure to document her fake journey on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook. She also falsified medical documents and forged doctor's notes to make her phantom illness as real as possible. According to her support page, Amanda had been diagnosed once before and had a brief remission before the illness came back with a vengeance as stage 4 metastatic cancer. Amanda's lies were never questioned, even when people became suspicious. No one wants to be the guy to ask a person suffering from cancer to prove it. It's a bad look. Amanda's family was so convinced that she was telling the truth that they went as far as suing someone who even questioned the veracity of her claims. Faking cancer is great for the scammer because it's one of those things where if you tried to prove that someone is faking cancer and you're wrong, yeah, not a good look. Unfortunately for Amanda, the IRS didn't care about people's feelings. 6 months after faking cancer and then claiming to be free of cancer, the IRS found out about her scam and sued her in court. The repercussions for her behavior came swiftly. First, she lost her job as a school principal and then had to face an uphill legal battle to avoid a lengthy prison sentence. Despite her disgusting lies, Amanda's family still supports her. Her father and brother both wrote statements claiming that they stood by her even though she deceived them all. In the end, she was sentenced to 5 years in jail in order to pay restitution to everyone she scammed. Number 1. Kidnapped and sent off. Rachel Elwell fell for an audacious scam where she was led to believe her boyfriend had been kidnapped in Ukraine. The entire scheme is so crazy that Rachel has been unrelentingly mocked for her gullibility, and everyone else believes they would have seen right through it. Would you? Rachel met the man who would eventually defraud her of thousands of dollars on Facebook. The man who contacted her was attractive and seemed intelligent. They shared similar interests, and he lived only 25 miles away. However, they didn't meet up because it was during lockdown and there was was no rush. Rachel liked that he was open and transparent, and they soon got close. But the con man didn't waste any time getting his con on. First, he told her that he was an engineer and had been flown to Ukraine to work on a UK government contract. Days after he supposedly left the UK, he messaged Rachel and told her that the engineering contract had been forcibly stopped and his equipment was seized. Then he began asking her for small amounts of money. He said that his company would cover the cost of his stay, but he was stranded and would need about £250 for food. Initially, Rachel adamantly refused. She wasn't a dummy and wasn't about to send any money to a guy she never met. But she eventually caved because she felt sorry for his predicament. After a few days, he came up with another story. This time, he said that loan sharks in Ukraine had kidnapped him. He tried to sell the story as best he could by sending her pictures from his cell. In the cell, he was sitting on a thin mattress and generally looked like he was having an awful time. He then sent her documents from the Ministry of Finance in Ukraine showing that he owed about £102,940. Afterwards, he called her and started begging and crying for her to help pay off the loan. So Rachel panicked, borrowed tens of thousands of pounds from different banks, and found a way to send it to him. She even got her sister into it and convinced her to send part of the money as well. Ultimately, Rachel sent him over £100,000. She discovered she'd been scammed when lockdown ended, and she drove over to his house. There, she met a lady who told her she'd never met the man Rachel described. Rachel's stomach sank to the floor. She reported the case to the police and banks, but found limited help. The bank did write off some of the loans, but ultimately decided that they couldn't help her any further. Interestingly, the banks warned her that she might be falling for a scam when she was making the transfers, but she didn't heed the several warnings she got. Rachel has appealed the decision and is currently waiting for a response. Most people who have heard Rachel's story agree with the banks. They believe that she was gullible and shouldn't have fallen for the scam. Who are some of the most heartless criminals out there? Let's get started with number 6, scamming Boston. Joanna Lee faked brain injuries to get thousands of dollars from funds organized for the victims of the Boston Marathon. When Lee was eventually caught lying, she pled guilty to 5 counts of larceny by pretenses and 1 count of making a false claim to a government agency. In total, she took about $40,000 from different funds organized to help actual victims. Lee claimed that she had a traumatic brain injury and suffered from PTSD as a result of the bombings. These injuries were accompanied by hearing and vision loss as well. Lee claimed that the bomb blast at the marathon had knocked her into a fence, but she'd actually only attended a viewing party for the marathon and had left the location well before the bomb went off. Regardless, Lee thrived off her lies. She used them to set up a GoFundMe under a different name, then used it to get thousands of dollars in support from One Fund Boston, a fund organized for the victims. Lee received a payment from the Massachusetts Victims of Violent Crime Compensation Program, as well as a student-run fund. Then she got a free dermatology treatment. After the tragedy of the bomb blast, Lee didn't seek treatment from anywhere for 2 weeks. But when she did it with pomp and extravagance. She claimed that she had been running to save victims when her traumatic brain injury occurred. She also claimed that she was a hero who just wanted to save lives. But Lee wasn't satisfied yet. She decided to embark on a massive public campaign to seek more money from One Fund Boston. This led to a closer re-examination of her claims. The re-examination uncovered the inconsistencies in her story and found that she had built her case on lies. Lee countered that her prosecution was because the authorities wanted to make her pay for her campaign and nothing else. Ultimately, Lee was convicted and handed a 1-year suspended prison sentence. She also got sentenced to 500 hours of community service and was asked to pay restitution of about $40,000. Maybe the brain injury was real. Number 5, adoption heartbreak. Carly Johnson was put through something of an emotional wrangle when she tried to adopt a baby from a fraudster who just wanted to play mind games with her. Carly and her husband Blake had been trying to adopt a baby girl for a long time to complete their family. They already had 2 boys, and they believed that a baby girl would make their family whole. When the fraudster first texted Carly, she was over the moon. She was in her office and had fallen to her knees in tears. She'd been waiting for the opportunity for a long time. She had tried to adopt through agencies, but they often had waiting lists that were a mile long. As such, Carly had been on the outlook for private adoption opportunities. The opportunity came from a woman named Skylar who claimed that she was an expectant mother. Skylar claimed that some of her friends had told her that Carly was looking for a baby to adopt, so decided to reach out. Sadly, Skylar was just a sick prankster who got a kick out of messing with parents who want to adopt. She wasn't even pregnant, and she had researched Carly before reaching out. Skylar would send fake scans of the supposed baby to Carly and would give her timely updates, but she never made any attempt to meet Carly in person. Anytime Carly wanted to meet Skylar, she would have episodes where she would lash out and claim that Carly and Blake weren't good enough for her child. Then she'd apologize for lashing out and blame her behavior on pregnancy hormones. Carly would accept the apology in good faith and continue communicating with her. When Skylar was nearing her due date, Carly began getting messages from other expectant mothers on Instagram who all communicated in the same style as Skylar. At one point, Carly got fed up with all the mind games and decided to cut all contact with Skylar, but even that didn't slow her down. Skylar then got into contact with Carly's husband Blake and began harassing him because he wouldn't speak to her without Carly present. The whole thing finally came to a head when it was finally time for Skylar to give birth. Carly decided that she no longer wanted to deal with Skylar's nonsense and would get an adoption through other means. But Skylar still stayed in contact with them. When she supposedly gave birth, she texted Carly and told her that there had been some complications with the birth. During the same time, another number claiming to be a friend of Skylar texted Carly and told her that she had given birth and was in the hospital. But the whole thing was a lie. There never was a baby, and Skylar had just been playing mind games. When she saw that Carly and her husband didn't take the bait to care about the child, she pretended to be another woman named Emma and texted Carly about another adoption. Emma had just given birth and supposedly wanted Carly and Blake to adopt the child immediately. Carly briefly considered flying out to Louisiana to adopt the baby, but realized it was yet another ruse when Emma texted and complained about a Skylar harassing her. It was then that Carly realized that she had never given Emma her phone number and that she was most likely another account Skylar had created to taunt her. The worst thing about this entire case is that Skylar never asked for money, so she can't legally be prosecuted. She was just enjoying harassing parents who wanted a baby. Can someone find her and send her to Russia? Number 4. Silver Singles. A lady named Kathy, who only wanted to give her first name despite being interviewed by ABC7 in Chicago, was unfortunately defrauded of over $100,000 by a man she met on a dating site. She only realized the extent of the fraud after watching Tinder Swindler on Netflix. Kathy only met the man who swindled her because she got lonely during the COVID-19 pandemic. The lockdowns had her longing for companionship, so she decided to join Silver Singles, a dating site for single people above 50 years old. The guy she matched with was charming and handsome, and Kathy fell for him almost immediately. Soon, they got into what's best described as a virtual relationship. The man started calling her, and they began professing their love for one another. Kathy called him her hubby, and he called her his soulmate. However, things were about to get tragic. Throughout their virtual courtship, Kathy had never actually met her man. When she tried to meet him in person, he claimed he had to make an urgent trip to Toronto, and that's when the stories began. First, he claimed that he needed working permits to get a job in the country and that he couldn't pay through a check. He asked Kathy to send him $5,000 for the permit, so she did. At the time, she reasoned that she was in love with him and wanted to do anything in her power to help the person she called her hubby. After that, the con artist Casanova continued to sell Kathy tall tales. He claimed that he had gotten into an accident and required $5,000 urgently for surgery. He even sent a picture of himself on a hospital bed as proof. Next, he claimed that his apartment manager was trying to kick him out after getting back home from the hospital. He also required money to sort this new problem out, and Kathy graciously sent it to him. For the most part, Kathy was okay with giving him money. This was someone she'd fallen head over heels for, and she believed it was only the right thing to do for someone she loved. Even when Kathy didn't have money, he convinced her to refinance her house, take out loans against it, and send the cash to him. He sent her screenshots of his checking account, showing that he had around $500,000, so Kathy knew she'd get refunded. But that was all lies. One day, a friend recommended the Tinder Swindler docuseries to her, and she suddenly realized that she was a victim. But by then, she'd already sent him over $92,000 and had ruined her credit in the process. Not only was she out a large amount of money, but he'd also created a rift between her and her children before he vanished. Kathy, unfortunately, will most likely never see her money back. Number 3. Elderly misdirection. A man named Dean was duped out of $10,000 by a sophisticated ring of scammers who had all his information. The scam itself began when he was called up by the scammers claiming to be the National Broadband Network. They claimed that he was entitled to a $300 refund because his new service wasn't working properly. From there, Dean was transferred to a woman who claimed she was from Telstra, which is an Australian telecommunications company, and she was supposed to process the refund. Dean didn't believe that the woman was who she said she was at first, but she quickly proved it to him by telling him all his account details. The information gave him confidence that he was indeed talking to a Telstra representative, so he cooperated with her. However, Dean's conversation with her somehow allowed her to gain access to his personal computer. Once she was in, she stole over $10,000 from his credit card, money the retiree didn't have. Unfortunately, scams like this are becoming more widespread and are difficult to stop. A scammer pretending to be working with a cable company is definitely hard for the average person to tell the difference. Number 2. Fraudulent fraud department. Reese Tapley, father of 2, was scammed out of his life savings of £3,100 by fraudsters who pretended to be his bank. The scam began when Reese got a phone call from a man named Samuel. Samuel claimed that he was calling from the Royal Bank of Scotland fraud department. He claimed that someone had accessed Reese's account from Manchester and that a new mobile number had been registered. At the same time, Reese received text messages that appeared to be from RBS claiming that a second number had been registered to his account. Reese didn't believe these claims at first. He was still quite suspicious of the man he was on the phone with. However, 2 things made him let his guard down. The first was that Samuel gave him specific details about his account. Reese had recently started financing a car payment, and Samuel was able to tell him about the details of the payment. The second was that the number on the call was also the number for the RBS fraud department. Once Reese had confirmed those details, the fraudster was home free. He convinced Reese to log into his account and made him hand over vital details about the account. Later, Samuel got Reese to transfer about £3,000 to 3 separate accounts. He claimed that the money would get sent back to him over the next few days. Unfortunately, that never happened. Reese decided to call the bank himself and clear the matter up, but he was promptly informed that he had fallen for a scam. Now Reese knows that the scammer had likely logged into his account at the same time and got it suspended. The suspension was what made Reese transfer almost all the money he had to the fake accounts. Unfortunately for Reese, he'll most likely not be getting his money back. Since he was conned into handing his own money over willingly, there isn't anything the bank can do to help him. Number 1. Blackmailing the parents. Siti Kamal blackmailed an Australian couple while they were spending their final moments with their 11-month-old baby. The couple, Jay and Dee Windross, were cradling their daughter in their arms when Siti Kamal began texting them and threatening them with withholding or selling the last memories they had of their daughter. Dee Windross had gotten her Samsung Note 8 phone stolen at the mall, and the phone had a lot of precious memories of their daughter. After the phone was stolen, they made a public appeal to whoever had stolen it to return it. They needed the phone back as it had irreplaceable memories they had with their infant who suffered from a terminal illness. Siti Kamal heard this appeal, so she did exactly what any kind and upstanding member of society would do. She texted the couple and claimed that she had the phone in question. She also told the couple that they would need to pay her $1,000 if they were ever going to get it back. Instead of just texting them once or twice as a common scammer would do, she made sure she pestered them with over 90 texts. In the texts, Kamal said if they didn't pay up, she would sell the phone. Kamal also begged the couple and confessed that she was just an honest person who didn't want to erase their memories but just wanted their money. For some reason, she believed that honest people went about blackmailing grieving parents. What makes Siti Kamal's blackmail even more reprehensible is the fact that she never even had the phone in the first place. She just wanted to profit from a horrible situation no matter what, which is exactly what an honest person would want to do. In the end, Kamal was arrested and charged. In court, her lawyers asked for a reduced sentence because she supposedly didn't have a criminal history. But many Malaysians posted evidence that Siti Kamal scammed them as well. One case was of an online ticketing scam run by someone with the exact same name. The person paraded themselves as a legitimate representative of airlines and purchased tickets for people. However, they were not purchasing tickets. Instead, they took the money from customers and disappeared into thin air. Malaysians who fell for the scam claim that the account they paid money to had the same name as Siti Kamal, and it's likely the same person. While the Australian court didn't take this ticketing fraud story into account, the judge called Siti Kamal's actions against the Windross reprehensible and sentenced her to 3 years in jail. She tried to appeal the judgment, but the appeal failed. Our hearts break for you, Siti. Stay strong in prison. What are some of the saddest scams criminals come up with? Let's get right to it and start with number 5, scamming grandpas. British girl Olivia Crutchley scammed her own grandfather for a period of 18 months to the point where he lost all of his savings. According to the media, Crutchley had told her grandfather she would be using the money for a legal battle she had with her workplace, the DIY company. Crutchley went as far as showing him emails that were allegedly written by lawyers, but it turned out she wasn't involved with the company at all. She had intended to use the money to fund her growing substance overuse, even if it meant lying and stealing from her granddad. So how was Grandpa able to give her a whopping £75,000? Well, he took out 2 different loans, sold his car, and even asked for money from family members, all to help his sweet granddaughter Olivia fund her never-ending legal fees. Although there isn't any technology yet to keep grandkids from scamming their own grandparents, there is technology to keep you from falling prey to identity theft. We can definitely help prevent that from happening thanks to our sponsor today, Surfshark VPN. Surfshark has over 3,200 servers across 100 countries that encrypt your data and shield your online identity by keeping your personal information safe from cyber threats, giving you online security and freedom anywhere you go. On vacation, change your virtual location back to your home country for a taste of familiarity. Unblock content and access global streaming services like Netflix so you can keep watching your favorite shows on the road. Have to log in using public Wi-Fi? Don't fret. Surfshark's encryption secures your data, protecting it from hackers while also blocking ads, trackers, malware, and phishing attempts so that you can browse safely throughout the web. Using Surfshark is like having your own online bodyguard. So let them protect you today by using the code Pablito and clicking on the link in the description below for your first 3 months free. According to Olivia, she'd lost a lot of money after receiving special training for a new position at work that she wasn't being compensated for. In addition, she had to travel to London and Birmingham, all of it paid by her loyal grandfather. Olivia sent her grandfather emails in which her supposed supervisor confirmed the cost of her travels out of the city. He'd initially sent £1,000 for her travel and training. After a while, Olivia informed him that she was no longer working and was planning to sue the company. Crutchley would send him emails from an employee organization detailing how she had to pay fees up front to start her legal process. The legal fees kept on piling on because, according to Crutchley, she had to change lawyers because her legal team was going through a family crisis. At some point, her granddad started receiving emails directly from her alleged lawyers. This is when he became suspicious. Some of the emails detailed very personal details from the lawyer's private life, and the communication didn't even come from an official company email address. The total sum of the money her grandfather sent her and her partner added up to £75,000. After a real legal battle, Crutchley was convicted to 2 years behind bars. Number 4. The Uber scam. An elderly man was conned into a vehicle by two individuals who claimed they came from overseas and were working with charities, was then driven to a bank. At the bank, the man withdrew an undisclosed amount of money, a large amount, we'll assume, in a quick transaction that made more than one person suspicious. The scammers that brought him to the bank later drove off with him in the car again. Authorities believe this was some sort of new scam that takes advantage of well-intentioned elderly men and women because they had never seen something like it in the Terrebonne Parish area. While scams that target the elderly seem to be much more common in online scenarios, it's not entirely uncommon to see criminals update their tactics to get a quick buck. While local authorities have stated the money was virtually impossible to trace, they still believe this wasn't a targeted event. All clues lead them to believe the scammers had no previous knowledge of the man and simply approached him when they saw him. A known tactic is to talk about social causes that may warm the hearts of older people. They're the demographic most likely to cooperate or help out any stranger who says they're related to a local charity. Sometimes these scammers will be so compelling, an older person might even find it hard to say no to a prompt like getting in their car. Authorities said people in the area should be on the lookout for clear red flags that could serve as indicators that potential scammers might be roaming around. If they say they're from out of the country, if they seem to be only approaching older people, they say they work with local charities, and if they tell them they need them to make large transactions, beware. Number 3. Not a bail. A woman looking to help her grandson in Canada was the victim of a major scam that made her lose $10,000 by answering a phone call. Elise, whose last name was kept private, hails from Burlington, Ontario, and received a series of phone calls late one night. The caller told her her grandson had been arrested, and the only way to get him out of jail was by paying a $10,000 bail. According to the call she received, her one and only grandson had been arrested, and Elise, taken away by her emotions, immediately went to action. Nothing would stop her, not even a nasty snowstorm currently in the area. Elise was on the phone for almost an hour with the scammers. After convincing her of the situation her grandson was struggling with, scammers sent her a taxi to pick her up and take her directly to the bank. Given how swiftly the taxi showed up, the victim's family suspected it wasn't real. It was likely just a car hired by the scammers. For a 95-year-old woman struggling with a delicate heart condition, getting in a taxi was the most she could do to help her grandson. Once they arrived at the TD Bank branch in Burlington, Elise asked to withdraw a suspicious amount of money. The bank teller attending to her noted how strange it sounded. He even went with her to the car to see who she was with. While the man was still unsure of the whole situation, he withdrew the money and handed it to her. Elise went home without a scratch, but lost $10,000. One of her children, who's her legal representative, spoke to the media about how the bank didn't contact him to oversee the transaction. He acts as her power of attorney, and his name's featured in the bank account, so the bank should have done due diligence and confirmed with him before a transaction this big happened. After finding out the whole ordeal was a scam and Elise was the victim of robbery, she felt incredibly embarrassed, fell for a scam in a moment of deep emotional confusion. According to the woman's family, TD Bank wasn't cooperating with the investigation and even failed to communicate with them. Authorities said they were prohibited from speaking to bank employees regarding the scam. Number 2. The $200,000 text message. An Australian family became one of the most notorious victims of a scam when they lost nearly all of their life savings. Losing everything they had worked hard for over 14 years meant the couple, who were going by the aliases Peter and Madison, and their 2 kids would have to sell their family home and move with relatives. They weren't even able to afford basic cost of living expenses like groceries. The emotional stress of the situation had turned the family into depending on the day-to-day to survive. All of their aspirations were pushed back for at least 10 years. Their daily jobs helped them cover the costs of their mortgage, but it wasn't enough to also buy food. A few months earlier, Madison had received a text message from Suncor stating she had a new payment ID set up for $895. The message didn't really set off any alarms, since it was sent in the same thread they usually receive message from the bank. The message said she needed to call Suncor, an Australian banking and insurance company, if she thought the payment was fraudulent. A phone number was included in the message. This phone number was going to allegedly connect her directly with the bank's fraud department. After a series of security questions were asked, everything seemed to check out. The whole interaction felt extremely legit. The voice over the phone told Madison her account had been hacked. There was even mention of the possibility of someone creating a fake passport and wiping out the whole account to zero. Given how trustworthy the interaction felt, Madison was compelled to comply with the voice was telling her to do, increase the account's transfer limit from $5,000 to $50,000 and transfer all the funds to a newly created bank account. While the original text message came in the same thread of previous messages from the bank, this was in fact a scam. A notorious scheme used nowadays. Spoofing is a technique where scammers overstamp a real phone number to make it look like they're communicating from an official bank number. Over 5 days, Madison received messages in the same message thread informing her of transactions of close to $50,000 that were being made. All of this was approved by her over the phone. Scammers were able to take almost $250,000 before Suncor ultimately froze the account. Once they contacted the bank to understand why their account had been frozen, they received the horrible news. They were victims of fraud. Their whole life savings had been transferred over to a Commonwealth bank account they didn't know. The bank was really quick in denying any responsibility. The money had been transferred by the couple, and the bank wasn't going to repay. The probabilities of getting their money back were close to none. With this in mind, the couple still believed they had been wronged by the bank. After all, they had been their clients for over 28 years. The bank informed them of their decision only 4 hours after the couple had presented all of the information regarding the case. Suncor would not take the blame. Added to this, the fraud department hinted that the whole situation was probably caused by Madison's mental state, which made her gullible to fall for a scam like this. This was a response that infuriated Peter, considering his wife had been laying in bed in fetal position for days on end. According to Peter, Commonwealth Bank had blocked the first attempt to transfer the money. They went on to alert Suncor of the scam. But even if the first transfer didn't go through, both Suncor and Commonwealth let through 4 additional transfers. They just seemed to be playing a game of blaming each other without actually taking any accountability. Commonwealth Bank was able to retrieve a bit more than $42,000, but only after the case was officially closed. The family decided to take proper legal action through an Australian Office of Financial Complaints. This added to the fact they decided to join a class action lawsuit against Suncor. Apparently, there were 5 other families that had been affected by similar scams and Suncor's inaction. Some of them lost between $25,000 and $80,000. As a response, Suncor officials said they would lower their interest rate to 1.5%. No repayments of their mortgage for 6 months and $3,000 to cover medical bills. But there is no attribution to their responsibility in the matter whatsoever. Media reports have stated that some of the biggest banks in Australia have been racking up profits of $33 billion a year. The public is now requesting them to sign up an agreement where they comply with paying back money to victims of fraud unless customers were involved in the scam itself. Number 1. Compromised emails. Vicky Regal and her daughter Sarah have lost everything. Once upon a time, they were in the process of buying a townhome in their native Colorado. But the idea came to a rapid halt when they realized a terrible mistake. They had sent the money they intended to use to pay for the property to someone else. On closing day for the property, and after signing hundreds of papers, the representative of the title company told them they didn't have the funds. When Regal replied that she had already transferred the money, the big alarm in her head started ringing. Vicky had sent the money to an unrelated bank account belonging to someone who'd hacked email interactions between her and the title company. Vicky and Sarah didn't notice anything suspicious when they started getting the fraudulent emails. In the emails, Vicky was told she had to make the full payment, almost $200,000 in 2 days. She received closing documents with the same date she had been told by the title company. Once the money was transferred, hackers took all of it. When Regal realized she now had no money and was in fact homeless, she broke down. She was so disgusted she even threw up upon hearing the news. The scam, officially known as Business Email Compromise, or BEC for short, is when a person has faked the email of a financial institution in order to transfer funds to an account they have control over. Given the fragile state in which their lives were at the moment, a GoFundMe page was created to try to help them out and raise back the money they lost. The page tells a little bit about their tragic story and how they lost everything they had due to the scam. What are some of the easiest scams to fall for? Let's get started with number 4. Another new company. Scammer Gerald Washington created a fake company to steal interviewees' personal information when they were looking for jobs. Washington posted an ad on Florida Marketplace's website claiming his company, Howard Enterprises, was expanding and desperately needed to fill 1,100 positions. It offered many roles from administrators to regional managers, with pay ranging from $13 to $32 an hour. After 350 job seekers responded to the posting, Washington rented an office space in Tallahassee to conduct the interviews. He offered dozens of applicants phony positions and requested their social security numbers and banking information. Washington also had some of them provide urine samples, for which they had to pay a $25 processing fee. Since giving your new employer personal details and even giving a urine sample is fairly common, it was easy for Washington to obtain people's private information. After quitting their current positions to start at Howard Enterprises, Washington's victims arrived for their first day of work only to find no one working that day. He emailed his deceived workforce explaining that he had to delay start dates as his grandfather had passed away. But his real grandfather had actually passed away 5 years earlier. 2 applicants reported Washington to Florida's Department of Employment Opportunities, who discovered that Howard Enterprises had an invalid tax ID number and was unauthorized to run in Tallahassee. The DEO then tracked the company's IP address to the free Wi-Fi at Pensacola State College, where Washington was a student. They also learned that Howard Enterprises previously rented an office space, but the building terminated the lease. Law enforcement arrested Washington and charged him with fraud and identity theft. Number 3. Desperate Attractions. An online gun-for-hire scammed mother of 2, Helen Hewlett, when she attempted to hire him to go after a former co-worker. Hewlett and Paul Belton worked at a vegetarian food factory in Norfolk, England. The pair frequently flirted with one another during their shifts, and Hewlett developed feelings for Belton, despite him being married with 3 children. The flirtation ended after an intimate encounter in Hewlett's car in the factory's overflow parking lot. Belton immediately regretted his actions and was no longer interested in her. But Hewlett couldn't accept his decision not to pursue a romantic relationship and developed an obsession with him. She flooded his inbox with emails begging to see him again and sending him suggestive photographs. Despite her advances, Belton made it clear he wanted nothing to do with her. After being laid off from their shared workplace, Belton got a new job at a chocolate factory. Shortly after, Hewlett started working there too. Not only did she follow him to his new job, but she also went on Facebook tirades where she called him a coward. She eventually left the job, claiming Belton bullied her and treated women inappropriately there. He showed management the emails she sent him, prompting them to dismiss her allegations. Additionally, Hewlett made an anonymous complaint to the company where she accused Belton of using offensive language to describe coworkers. Management suspected Hewlett was the whistleblower and dismissed the claims again, advising Belton to go to the police. Hewlett's obsession was far from over. She took to the dark web to find a website advertising hundreds of people for hire that were former military personnel or gang members who were available to carry out this particular job. Undetectable methods, and said it had a 100% success rate. Prices depended on the methods used, with a sniper costing between $20,000 and $60,000, an arson attack priced up to $20,000, and as little as $2,000 for a physical attack. Hewlett posted in a forum that she needed to target someone in Norfolk, and it had to look like an accident. Someone, going by the name of Marksman, a member of the site, reached out, and they developed a plan. Hewlett set up a Coinbase account to buy crypto and transferred roughly $28,000. Then she transferred the money to Bitcoin to Marksman, along with Belton's full name, home and work addresses, and picture. The website promised to activate the job at the time of payment, although the money would be moved to an escrow account and only taken after the job was done. Hewlett waited for news and constantly searched for articles about fatalities in her area. One thing Hewlett didn't consider throughout her planning was to make sure the website was legitimate. And as she later learned, scams on the dark web are surprisingly common. But really, who gets scammed by a fake gun for hire? The money landed in a Romanian account. The police traced the payments from her Coinbase account and arrested her. During her trial, she claimed her posts on the dark website were her venting rather than eliciting services. Hewlett also stated that she didn't think anything would happen to Belton until she gave permission for the job to go ahead. The jury found her guilty and sentenced her to 7.5 years in prison. Number 2. The Mandarin Scam. Scammers in Australia forced Chinese students to fake their kidnappings to get their parents' ransom money. One victim, who remained anonymous, received a random call from someone speaking Mandarin. The caller informed the woman that she would be receiving a package from DHL, then promptly transferred her to a fake police officer. The officer told the woman that she had been connected to a transnational financial crime involving a notorious criminal and that she would be sent to jail due to that connection. After receiving a warrant with her picture, the woman felt there was no reason not to believe the callers. The officer told her that if she stayed quiet and paid him off, he could protect her. The scammers then told her that she'd been under surveillance and that someone was monitoring her at all times. They demanded money from the frightened woman, giving a different reason each time. She said she never fully understood why she needed to send cash, but the scammer's operation was so thorough that she believed everything. So, the woman paid expedited investigation fees of $4,000, $90,000 on a security bond, and $250,000 for a civil liability case. Since the fake police officers also said her case was classified. The woman couldn't even verify if what they were saying was true. Within 10 days, she'd paid $500,000 to stay out of prison. Despite already paying $500,000, the scammers claimed the allegations against her were growing. So she needed to pay them even more money and convinced her to trick her parents into giving it. So the woman told her mother she needed money for a security deposit related to her visa and that it would just sit in the bank. Her mother went and borrowed the money from family and friends and deposited it. Immediately after that, the woman cut off all contact from her family. The woman's parents knew something was wrong when the money disappeared from the account. The scammers told her she was in even bigger trouble than she initially thought and sent her to a hotel to await further instructions. Convinced she couldn't communicate with her family, the woman ignored the flood of calls and messages they sent to her phone. Eventually, her parents used Find My iPhone to track her location, where they assured her that she was a victim, not a criminal. She was one of many targeted as part of a sophisticated scam targeting Chinese speakers worldwide, especially in Australia. Scammers contact victims with a phone call that starts with a recorded message in English and then transfer them to someone claiming to be from the Chinese embassy or consulate. They convince their victims that they have been implicated in a crime or that their identities have been stolen. This could affect their visas or cause harm to their families back home, creating a sense of urgency. Under the con artist's mind games, students took extreme measures to save themselves. The scammers convinced some of them to stage their own kidnappings to get their parents to send ransom money. Victims would send pictures of themselves gagged and bound, prompting horrified parents to wire the money over as quickly as possible. The scammers were likely based in Taiwan and would call people worldwide. The people running the operation arranged for lower-level members to set up call centers in other countries. Some of the people involved in the operation could be victims themselves. Police in Brisbane, Australia, raided a house where they found 23 Taiwanese citizens making phone calls. The workers were on working holiday visas, and their passports, cell phones, and other personal belongings were found locked away in a separate room. They had been spending 10 to 12 hours a day making scam calls. These satellite offices are challenging to uncover, and the raid in Brisbane resulted from a worker running away and reporting the scam. Number 1. The Gloria Hunter impostor. A fraudster fooled a bank cashier into thinking she was British TV personality Gloria Hunter. An older woman entered a London Santander banking branch and claimed to be Hunter. This fake scammer also had 2 people with her who she claimed were her daughter and grandson. The fraudster had Hunter's bank details and an ID with the star's full name. The banker, Aisha Davis, had no reason not to believe the woman. The fake Hunter requested her alleged grandson be added to her account. Davis guided the trio through the process and photocopied their documents. The woman never mentioned being a celebrity, simply saying she just wanted to add her grandson to the account because she was sick. Later that day, $127,000 was gone from the real Gloria Hunter's account, and an additional $22,507 was missing the next day. Hunter reported the identity theft to the authorities, who arrested Davis and charged her for her involvement in the scam. In court, Davis stated she had never heard of Gloria Hunter before and followed all of the bank's standard protocols while fulfilling the customer's request. She passed the 2 driver's license that the trio handed her through a UV scanner, which appeared legitimate. Security camera footage revealed that the scammer looked nothing like Hunter, although Davis admitted that she was too young to know what the TV personality looked like. Hunter's full name is Mary Winifred Gloria Hunter, and Davis said that since the woman she served that day was older, she had the stereotypical appearance of someone named Mary. It sounds ridiculous, but it doesn't, right? When the prosecution argued that Gloria Hunter was very famous, having starred on popular shows like The One Show and This Morning, Davis said that she had to Google the woman. Davis also stated that bank fraud happens all the time, but due to Hunter's celebrity status, the bank employee was being scapegoated to protect the bank's reputation. She pleaded not guilty to 1 count of fraud. The authorities tracked down 18-year-old Alan Dowie, who posed as the grandson. Once the trio had access to Hunter's money, they went on a shopping spree at places like Zara and splurged on Rolex watches. Dowie told authorities that a friend recruited him to go into the bank with the 2 women. The friend offered him $1,250, and while he knew it was a scam, he handed Davis his genuine driver's license during the transaction. He received an 18-month sentence, suspended for 2 years after the judge said he didn't want to see the student enter prison when he could get his degree instead. Ironically, Hunter hosted Rip Off Britain, a show about consumer complaints and scams. She called for stricter security measures as it was clear that her appearance was completely different from the fraudsters. She stated that if any of her family visited the bank and said they wanted to be a co-signatory, the bank should perform more thorough security checks. Additionally, she claimed the entire ordeal made her feel that her money wasn't safe with the bank. Santander acknowledged the distress the ordeal caused Hunter and reimbursed her for the lost money. She's probably lucky she's a celebrity, considering the bank's typical responses to scams that don't don't get public attention. In a public statement, Santander claimed to have improved their processes to ensure that fraudulent activity doesn't happen again. Police have yet to identify the fake Hunniford and her daughter. Who are some of the most heartless criminals who don't care about anyone? Let's start with number 5, Lord Fraud. Jonathan Allard scammed multiple people of millions of pounds and used the money from the fraud to live a lavish life. After getting $4 million from 50 investors to run a fictitious company, Allard used the cash to purchase a Lamborghini Aventador and a luxury £1.2 million apartment in southwest London. He lived the life meant for a lord, so he decided to get the title and was officially known as Lord Jonathan Allard. Aside from being an actual lord, Allard also had the arrogance of a monarch. In his found diary entries, he wrote that he deserved everything he was getting and that it was all a result of him being smarter and knowing how to cheat better. For all his shortcomings, Allard was right. He did know how to cheat better. He had set up a company called Zurich Private Capital, or ZPC, and made it his piggy bank. He told potential investors that the company would help them invest their money in soybeans and oil. But all of that was false. Any money paid out was paid from new investors, and Allard made it his mission to spend as much of the money as possible. This left many of his victims destitute. One 70-year-old widow said that Allard's scam meant that she may have to work until she passes away, as she no longer had any money for retirement. A policeman said he had to work till he was 66 for the same reason. Another investor invested £125,000 and claimed that the financial calamity had set them back years. Unfortunately for Lord Allard, his scam wasn't going to last forever. He was eventually picked up by the police and sentenced to 7 years in prison for one charge of fraud. Lord Allard believed he was so much smarter than everyone else that he wrote it down to brag to his diary. We like to pretend it was a Lisa Frank diary, for good measure. Number 4, an identity crisis. When Axton Betts Hamilton was just 11, she and her family experienced a horrid episode of identity theft that followed her up until she got into college. This theft wasn't just a flash in the pan. It was a crime that messed with her childhood and caused her entire family trauma. The family first realized that something unusual was afoot when Axton's father stopped receiving his monthly magazines. At the time, he believed that someone was just stealing his mail to get his social security number. A few weeks after that, the phone line was cut off. Axton's father, John, worked long hours, so he didn't have the time to properly investigate. So John delegated the investigation to Axton's mother, Pam, who worked as a tax preparer. Pam spent long hours at the police and post office asking for an investigation to be launched into their missing mails and cut off utilities, but there was no progress. No one knew who was messing with the mail and financials of the family, and in time, they all started getting paranoid. The police didn't have a suspect, and the crimes persisted. Soon, this paranoia spread to Axton. She was told to always close her curtains and never answer the door, even if she knew who was there. Her parents were scared, and they wanted to protect their daughter as best they could. At some point, John started telling Axton that she had the responsibility of protecting the house. It was almost like they were waiting for the other shoe to drop. Like they were waiting for an attack. It was an unfair position to place a child in. Axton's parents were scared that the people stealing their identities might want to steal Axton too, so she was spending less time outside. The consequences of the theft also meant that money became quite tight at home, and Axton had to live in extreme poverty. She soon finished high school and enrolled in university. Before going to the university, she told her father that she would do all she could to find out who had caused their family so much pain. On getting to college, another bombshell was waiting for Axton. When she wanted to rent an apartment, she discovered that she had a horrible credit rating of 380. She also found out that someone had opened a credit card under her name when she was just 11. At this point, she called her mom in tears and asked why anyone would steal her life from her. Her mother replied that it wasn't a personal attack and that the thief just got lucky with getting her social security number. Soon, Axton fixed her credit rating, graduated from college, and acquired a master's degree in consumer sciences. She then went on to get a PhD PhD in Human Development and Family Studies. Her dissertation explored the impact that identity theft had on children. At 30, Axton received devastating news. Her mother, Pam, suffered from leukemia. 6 months later, she died from the illness. And that's when things blew up. 2 weeks after her passing, Axton got a call from her father about a credit card statement in her name that he had found while cleaning out Pam's things. The statement was from when Axton was 18 and showed that she had gone over her limit by a substantial amount. Axton was stunned by this call. The fact that the paperwork was in her name and had been found in her home meant something different entirely. It was like the missing piece of the puzzle she had spent her life trying to solve. Axton immediately went home and began looking through her mother's things. That was when she found evidence that her mother had been the secret identity thief all along. Over the next 5 years, Axton went through mountains of paperwork hidden in different places in their home. But that wasn't all. Axton found evidence of her mother living a second life on the internet. She had created several new identities and told her friends from high school that she had never married and didn't have a child. She told other friends that she had gotten married, but her husband was terrible to her, so they had divorced. She was also having an affair with another man. Axton also found a receipt for a $400 cubic zirconia engagement ring that her mother had bought for herself, but insisted that her lover had bought for her. Worst of all, Axton found out that her father had been giving Pam about $11,000 each semester for school, but Pam had pocketed most of the money. Pam had defrauded her immediate and extended family of around $500,000, and she had spent it on, well, no one really knows. While Axton had found piles of cheap costume jewelry and dozens of cheap high heels her mother stowed away, it still didn't explain what she did with the money. Axton says that the only plausible explanation for this is that her mother was a psychopath. For this, she points to a picture of herself with her parents accepting an award for her work on identity theft, with her mother smiling broadly. According to Axton, Pam never showed an ounce of guilt despite watching her young daughter suffer. John, Pam's husband, at first didn't believe the evidence when his daughter showed him. However, he's come to accept it and considers his marriage to her a closed chapter. Today, he has a long-term girlfriend, and his daughter says he's happier than ever. Number 3. The preferred buyer. Eileen Allen was scammed out of £10,000 by a fraudulent seller on eBay. Eileen, a grandmother of 5, wanted to purchase a motorhome online and found a great one on eBay. She wanted to treat her family to a vacation with the motorhome and believed that the best place to get a great deal was the internet. And at first, she thought she was right. She saw an ad for a motorhome that cost around £27,000 and thought it was a steal. The seller claimed she was a 78-year-old woman and had already agreed to a deal with another buyer willing to pay a deposit. However, the seller said that she liked Eileen very much and would prefer to sell the motorhome to her, have to pay a deposit as well to match the deal of the first potential buyer. Sounds reasonable, right? Of course, all of this was to create urgency so she could get Eileen to pay a deposit before seeing the motorhome. So Eileen decided to pay a deposit of £7,800. The woman immediately emailed her a receipt for the payment confirming that the entire operation was genuine. Before sending the money, Eileen had asked to meet the woman in person, but they said that they were too old to travel to a location to meet. She also said that she had a tracker on the motorhome and gave Eileen insurance advice. All of this painted the woman in such a good light that Eileen had no call to be suspicious. Well, unfortunately, she made it on this video. The day after Eileen sent the money, the woman called her crying. She said the transferred money was yet to reflect in her account and that she had been scammed before and didn't want to get scammed again. She then offered to return the money as she didn't want to partake in the deal anymore. Eileen was further swayed and decided to transfer a further £2,200 to the woman to keep the deal. Before she sent the second payment, her bank told her to hold off on further payments before seeing the motorhome in person. But Eileen had already bought in, so she refused to listen, sent the money anyway. Eileen finally knew she'd been scammed when she got another call from the scammer saying that the second payment also hadn't shown up. So Eileen talked to her bank and she realized that the payments had been sent and that the seller had just been telling her lies. Since then, the scammer ceased all contact. Eileen later found out that the same scammer had scammed other people of roughly the same amount of money. After finally accepting that she'd been scammed, Eileen contacted her bank. Sadly, she was informed that all the money had left her account and she likely won't be getting any of it back. Number 2. The wrong zip codes. Bhakti Shah used her experience as a paralegal to pretend she lived in a different home to send her child to a better school in a nicer area. We can understand that, right? Shah perpetuated her crime by convincing the school that she lived at an address that wasn't hers. The home she claimed to live in belonged to an elderly couple, and that couple had to pay much higher taxes over 7 months because of Shah's claims. To make things even worse, Shah showed up at the elderly couple's home to retrieve her mail and claimed that the mail was sent to their home as a result of a mix-up. Shah completed this fraud by forging several documents showing that she had moved from her previous residence to a new one. All of this was done to get her child into a choice school in the area. The school is a pretty prestigious one and has dedicated slots for 158 students that live within 1.1 miles of it. Unfortunately for Shah, she lived 3 miles away from the school and wasn't in the designated area, so her child's application to the school was rejected. Shah then claimed to have bought a property in the area. However, the authorities told her that merely owning land in the area wasn't enough. They said she had to live there. So, she decided to change the address of the property to the house in front of the plot she claimed she bought. This house was the home of Angela and Christopher Cole, 2 octogenarians. To complete her fraud, Shah registered a water council and council tax account with the property. She then used her skills as a conveyancer to create a false contract of sale and land registry form. This was what provided the documentation she used to enroll her child in the school. Unfortunately for her, this scam was destined to fail. Angela Cole soon became suspicious about her increased taxes and asked for investigators to get to the bottom of the matter. She and her husband had been getting charged higher counsel fees, and they couldn't understand why. After an investigation was conducted, Shah was arrested and charged with 8 counts of fraud. In court, Shah admitted her crimes, but claimed she did it for a good reason. Unfortunately, the judge disagreed and said that Shah carried out the scam for long periods and that he would keep all options open when sentencing her. And for continued fallout, Shah lost both careers she worked hard for, and her kid is now in a fee-paying school as he'd failed the entrance exam for another school he tried to attend. Number 1. Scare tactics. Michael Ruiz has made a career out of conning immigrants into paying him money to avoid deportation. According to the police, Ruiz started this scam as far back as 2006. His modus operandi was simple. He would approach suspected illegal immigrants, pretend to be an immigration officer, and would blackmail them until they handed over thousands of dollars. Ruiz would claim that he had the power to deport them and that the payment was their only way out. Sometimes he would tell them that he could help their family members with immigration and would charge thousands of dollars for that too. Other times, he would even invent fictitious deportation orders for legal immigrants and suggest they pay him to make it all go away. In 2010, Ruiz was arrested and jailed for 6 years for his scheme. While the shakedown stopped, it was only for a while, as Ruiz was released into the wild 6 years later, and he almost immediately went back to his shakedown. Ruiz posed as a law enforcement officer and found 6 local immigrants to scam. He told them that he could give them driver's licenses and make them citizens for just a few $1,000s. If they didn't pay him, he said they would all be deported. He also sold them fake social security numbers for thousands of dollars. Aside from using his false identity to defraud immigrants, he also used it in his daily life. When local police confronted him about his lies, he said he was an officer with the New York City Police Department who worked in Times Square. He even gave his phony NYPD badge number to seal the deal. Ruiz was able to scam his victims so well because they couldn't report him. Many of them were scared of getting deported, so they couldn't even approach the police with reports if they suspected they were being taken advantage of. In the end, Ruiz was caught again by the actual police. This time, he was charged with 4 counts of blackmail and 4 counts of fraudulently impersonating an officer to secure property. Who are some of the most despicable scammers you'd never want to meet? Let's start with number 6, another fake guru. Miriam Mbula scammed tons of people through a decade-long criminal career. But instead of owning up to her criminal past and present, she painted herself as a victim of circumstances. She was so successful in doing this that she was once invited to a TV show to speak about her life and inspire other women. On the show, Mbula claimed that her involvement in crime was due to being in a bad relationship and running with the wrong group. She also said that she went to prison and was forced to have her child while she was in the slammer. But her stories are only shades of the truth. not the truth in full color. Like some 80s action hero, Miriam found herself in Spanish prison. Well, a Spanish prison, like a prison in Spain, not a prison for Spaniards, where she befriended the mother of a woman named Ellie. Miriam took care of the woman and became very useful as a translator. Miriam claimed that she would be able to get the woman a bail hearing, but to do this, she'd need some personal information. The information included things like her children's names, their ages, and any other detail the woman could produce. Miriam claimed all of this was just to get the right bail hearing. Most bail judges, especially Spanish bail judges, like hearing personal details about kids they've never met. It softens their hearts. So it makes sense that Miriam would need to know about her kids and grandkids for a bail hearing. Seriously, wasn't the woman like, "Why are you asking me about my kids for this?" A while later, the woman's daughter, Ellie, got a call from someone named Charlene claiming to be an embassy official. Charlene claimed that her mother would be granted a bail hearing for a fee of £10,000. The official knew everything there was to know about her, so Ellie paid the money. The official called again and this time asked for £5,600 more. Again, Ellie gave them money. However, Ellie noticed something was wrong when a text from Charlene had the Apple ID Miriam Dynasty. Ellie asked who Miriam Dynasty was, and Charlene stopped replying. Ellie knew she'd been scammed. The incident was so financially catastrophic that Ellie and her family, including a child with Down syndrome, were evicted as a result. A year after that incident, Miriam continued her schemes by meeting another woman and convincing her that she worked for Nike. Miriam then convinced the woman that she could make her daughter the face of the sportswear brand. Every parent thinks their kid's the best looking, so it's reasonable that the woman bought it. So the woman paid £11,400 for an opportunity that never existed. Miriam, adding insult to injury, scammed the woman again by selling her luxury items that were never delivered. The victim paid £18,214 for dresses she never got because Miriam never had them either. And still, Miriam was able to use her status as a single mother to sell another sob story. When she came on TV to talk about her experiences, Miriam said that what she went through inspired her to create Mentor Matcher. Mentor Matcher was a program that matched disadvantaged young women with mentors who would guide them to the right path. Women who would like to learn from the Mentor Matcher program were supposed to pay a ticket fee of $200 just to listen to Miriam speak. So, a lot like college. Am I right? However, Miriam's claims that she was only a victim of circumstances didn't hold up to scrutiny. Because she was arrested and put in prison, Miriam had committed a slew of credit card frauds. At the time this video drops, she had built an incredible criminal career riddled with 13 convictions for 34 offenses. This includes 27 charges for fraud and dishonesty, and she has been jailed in the UK, Belgium, and Spain. Miriam has become so infamous that she now has an informal group of victims going after her. One of her victims, Tamara Gao, created a Twitter account and started asking for people who had been scammed by Miriam to step forward, and they did. One of the women who came forward was Miriam's college friend, Chimina. Chimina said that Miriam was always the friendly type in college, and a while after graduation, they got in contact through Facebook. Very soon, Miriam became a close friend, and Chimina started telling her about the trouble she had. One day, Chimina made the mistake telling her about her grandmother who just had a few months to live. Chimina and her mother were flying back to Jamaica to see her and were in the process of getting tickets. Miriam told her that she could get discounted tickets for her through her company, and that Chimina should send over the ticket money to purchase the tickets at a discount. Unfortunately, Chimina trusted her friend and sent the money. Yep, it turned out to be a scam because Miriam didn't send any tickets over and stopped picking up Chimina's calls. It's hard to believe Miriam could even find the time to scam an old college friend who's trying to visit a terminally ill relative. What with all the clubbing of baby seals she's probably been doing. But Miriam didn't just scam in prison and outside. She also took her trade to church. After leaving prison, she joined SPAC Nation Church, congregation based in South London, where she became senior pastor. This is a church we've covered in the past. At the church, she began relating with young churchgoers and made her home a safe space for them. But before long, she began asking her congregation for money. According to one of her victims, Sarah, Miriam's entire shtick was to find young people with good credit ratings and get them to borrow money to loan her. This created a situation where young people around her suffered with repaying the loans while Miriam hardly bothered about them. Somehow, Miriam has yet to be arrested for any of these crimes. She's still at large, and an investigation into her conduct is ongoing. going. And Ellie, the evicted woman with the Down syndrome's kid, seriously, who evicts a family like hers? I don't care that you were just scammed and your child has special needs. Get out on the street where you belong. They were probably better off without a landlord like that anyway. Number 5. Serial squatting. Heather Ann Schwab has been sentenced to prison for repeated housing scams that left homeowners in debt. The prolific scammer and her husband, Mr. Heather Ann Schwab, have been evicted from their rented homes more than 20 times. The modus operandi of the couple's fraud is exactly what you'd expect it to be. They would use phony names to escape background checks while filing paperwork to move into their new homes. Then the Schwabs would refuse to pay rent, forcing the homeowners to go through the tedious process of evicting them legally. Once they were evicted, the couple would go and start the scam with another home. According to one former landlord, Heather and her husband always gave excuses when asking about their payments. It was usually something or the other. When they eventually got evicted, which was 5 months after moving in, the landlord discovered that they had trashed the entire house. The couple became so notorious for their scamming that they eventually had to switch states and start all over. And once they moved, they began their fraud once more. The Schwabs were eventually arrested and made to face the law. Heather was sentenced to 6 years in prison, and her husband will also be sentenced in the future. The good thing is that they won't need to pay rent in prison. It's free. And while the scam makes sense on paper, yeah, just move in and wait until you're forced out 4 to 5 months later. Sure, free rent, but who wants to move that much? And they'd been evicted over 20 times. We pay high rent just so we don't have to move once every 5 years. Those two are crazy. Number 4, magical scammers. A couple of fake magicians, as opposed to actual magicians such as Chris Angel. Is that guy still around? Anyway, they fleeced an unsuspecting man of 1,700 pounds after performing a magic trick. Their victim was cognitively impaired, so he was an easy target for the fake Chris Angels to finally fool someone and make money. The first of the tricksters approached the man and told him that he had good fortune. Afterwards, the man performed a magic trick for him and asked for payment for the trick. The second magician then approached the victim and performed the same trick, illusion, and then demanded he withdraw cash from the ATM for payment. In total, the victim withdrew 1,700 pounds to pay the two fraudsters. The scammers are still on the run, and the police are looking for information that could lead to their arrest. And performing the same trick twice in a row? That has to be against some rule somewhere in the Magic Castle. And for our money, David Blaine's the closest to Houdini we're ever going to get, and is far superior to Chris Angel. Shout out in the comments if you agree. Number 3, the good old faking an illness scam. Wendy Jane Lentini scammed the government thousands of dollars after claiming to have multiple sclerosis. The funny thing about this is that Lentini is currently serving a jail term for insurance fraud, so she isn't new to this at all. Lentini had been sentenced to a 5-year jail term back in 2018 when she was found guilty of scamming the Commonwealth Bank's ComInsure. To commit the Commonwealth Bank fraud, Lentini claimed she had multiple sclerosis. This allowed her to receive a massive payout from the bank. When quizzed about the crime, she claimed that she committed it because her husband was physically abusing her and she was suffering from battered wife syndrome. She was only discovered after her husband sent a letter to law enforcement a decade after the crime was committed. The police discovered that around that period, Jane also committed disability check fraud on the basis of a multiple sclerosis diagnosis that she never had. To commit the fraud, she enlisted the help of a woman who actually had the disease and used her paperwork to file for the disability checks. When the scam was discovered, prosecutors decided to ask for extra time to be added to Jane's current sentence. Jane's attorney, on the other hand, claimed that his client had already served time and was sorry for offending. The judge, hearing her case, said that Jane might be sorry, but she never came clean about her crime. In fairness, though, why would she? Did the judge expect her to randomly come forward while she was already serving her sentence for a similar crime? Lentini was still awaiting sentencing at the time of this video. Number 2, choose Ponzi. Derek Chu was accused of running a Ponzi scheme and defrauding people of over $39 million. Chu used several companies to raise millions of dollars from unsuspecting victims. The victims were told that their money would be used for investments that would guarantee them fantastic returns. Chu said that their money would go into purchasing and reselling basketball tickets. They were also told that they would invest in luxury suites around the country, but none of that was ever done. Chu simply took the money he was given and spent it on luxury cars, expensive jewelry, and travel. For the luxury suit scam, Chu would take his victims to the Chase Center in San Francisco. Then he would tell them they would earn a 50% interest if they invested in a suite for $440,000. Instead of purchasing the suite, he used the new money to pay previous investors just like a regular Ponzi scheme. Derek Chu used a part of the largesse from his fraud to indulge in his love for collecting luxury cars. He bought 12 expensive Lexuses and some Porsches according to a complaint against him. He also bought a house from the proceeds of his fraudulent business. The house was in an affluent area, and he made sure to use it to convince more unsuspecting people to lend him money. One of the victims who believed in him was a man named Jonathan Mayedes. Mayedes believed that Chu was a successful businessman as a result of his lavish spending and decided to loan him money through promissory notes. In total, Mayedes loaned Chu over $750,000. Most of the money is yet to be returned. The insane thing about this entire gig is that it isn't the first time Chu would be accused of fraudulent behavior. In fact, he had previously been caught up in a fraud case with his father, Felix Chu. Felix was accused of running an elaborate scam that targeted elderly investors and swindled them out of their life savings. According to the complaint, Felix and his son, Derek, issued promissory notes to their victims and paid out the interest on the investments for a while before stopping. Derek has now been arrested and charged with wire fraud and money laundering. He's been ordered to pay back Mayedes what's owed and currently faces 20 years in prison if convicted of wire fraud. He also faces up to 10 years in prison for money laundering. Number 1. The church-going Ponzi. Ephraim Taylor defrauded members of several churches of over $14 million by promising them extraordinary returns through ethical investments. The basics of the scam were simple. Taylor sold an image of a young Christian black man who made money through smart and ethical investments. Soon, Taylor started touring churches and speaking to congregations about ethical investment practices. In his messages to congregations, he made sure to invoke Jesus, quote, Bible passages, and generally sell a fantastic and overblown image of himself and his business. For example, Taylor said he made his first million and founded 2 tech companies before leaving high school. He called himself the youngest black millionaire and CEO in the country. When asked about his net worth, he claimed that it was $20 million on a bad day. But his fraud didn't kick off till he went on what he called the Wealth Tour. This tour was a tour of popular churches where he was invited to speak about wealth creation and socially conscious investment opportunities. Taylor was invited to these churches to speak about how to make money ethically, but he instead went there to toot his horn and convinced members of the church to give him their money to invest. On the tour, he told members of the congregation to fire their brokers because they weren't investing wealth ethically and were inefficient. He said that he had a low-risk and high-reward model that guaranteed steady returns through socially conscious investment vehicles. Of course, these were all lies. The churchgoers who listened to Taylor were lulled into believing him because he seemed like a good Christian. Taylor preached the gospel, was rich, and had the approval of their pastors to speak to them. These Christians also believed that ostentatious living in preachers of the word is a sign of God's grace, not a red flag that they should run from. So obviously, everything checked out. They must have forgotten Jesus' opinions on personal wealth. When he started speaking with individuals who wanted to invest their savings with him, Taylor said he could guarantee a 20% return on investments. He also told them that they could invest in sweepstakes machines that guaranteed a 300% return on investments. He claimed that 20% of the returns will be given to charity as well. But that was all a lie. The machines and investment vehicles he spoke about literally did not exist. Instead of using investor funds as they wanted, Taylor used the money to fund his wife's music career, pay rent, settle business expenses, and in a few cases, pay previous investors. It was a proper Ponzi scheme. One of his biggest victims was Gary and Anita Dorio, a couple who attended Lakewood Church, owned by the popular evangelist Joel Osteen. When Taylor went to the Lakewood Church, he was allowed to speak about finances to a small group. But before he was introduced, a staff member reminded the group that Taylor wasn't endorsed by the church. Unfortunately, the Dorios believed Taylor's pitch, and they turned over $1.2 million to him to invest. Soon, things began to fall apart for the enterprising scammer. He ran out of money to pay investors, and they began banging on his office doors. When Taylor noticed that things were disintegrating, he fled his office and disabled his website so none of his victims could reach him. He essentially had to go into hiding. When the Dorios learned that they had been scammed, they went back to the church and were told that they should never have invested with him, like they didn't already know that. The same message was given to other members of other churches who told their pastors about how Taylor scammed them as well. There was no help from the churches, and the victims had to sit with the reality that they had lost their money for life. Taylor could run, but he was very bad at hiding. After about a year, he and his wife would be tracked down to their hiding spot. His wife had given up on her music and now rented a massage room at a massage parlor called Panacea Massage. The workers at the parlor became suspicious of Mrs. Taylor, who called herself Liz Taylor, when they overheard conversations between her and her husband being concerned about cameras in the shop. There was also constant discussion between the pair about the fortune they'd lost. So the co-workers Googled her and discovered that her husband was a huge fraud and on the run from the police. They eventually got in contact with one of those gotcha news shows called The Lookout, who then later told the police. In the end, Ephraim Taylor was arrested and was made to face the law. He was sentenced to 19 years in prison and was ordered to pay restitution of about $15 million. When are these guys going to learn? Ponzi's never work. Don't do them. Click to watch one of these next videos. Let us know in the comments section what you'd rather do. Invest your own money yourself or hire a professional.